and they don't know what's available out there. So keep communicating with them. So now moving into one of the main indicators that our industry has, and the slide up there for those that you can see it, is the NSSF adjusted NICS transaction history. So the industry's got a number of different indicators, NICS being one of the main ones. What we try to do is take the FBI NICS, which comes out every month, and make it a little bit clearer. They have a little bit of wonkiness with their data, where they have some NICS checks that don't have anything to do with a firearm transfer, application checks or concealed carry state checks. We take those out, and then we come up with the adjusted number. And as you can see from this chart there, one of the things I really wanted to point out was the 5-year period, 5-month period between November 12th and November 2012 and March 2013. That area there, that 5-month period, accounted for almost 9 million NSSF adjusted NICS, and that's the same figure that we were seeing, historically in years 2008, 9, and 10, just in that 5-month period. So if you want to move on to the next slide, Chris. And this will give us a little bit more up-to-date information, again, using the NSSF adjusted NICS data. The lime green chart is last year, and the darker green is this year. You can see, going back to January over January, January 14 versus January 13 was down 45%. And then significantly, step by step, that gap closed until finally in September it was about even. October we had a positive, and now November again in the positive. And as Miles mentioned there, it probably wasn't the first 3 weeks of November that brought that positive. It was a strong close, so we're hoping that momentum is going to continue into December. And I guess we'll move on one slide. Historically, just looking at the last 5 years, actually 2008, 9, and 10 were all about 9 million adjusted checks a year. 11 is when we started to see a nice increase, 15%. Hey, people were saying, wow, what a great year. Then all of a sudden, in 2012, happened up to 13.8 million checks, a huge increase. And, we knew that it wasn't sustainable. People, were certainly enjoying the sales and not enjoying the part about not having product, but still it was better than being the other way around. 2013 continued the strength there. We had a nice 7% increase over 12, and now 14, 11 months into it. I don't like to predict the future, but I'm comfortable predicting. With 11 months in, we should have about a total of 13 million checks at the end of the year. Now it's down over last year, but if you look at 5 years ago, we're still up 38%, which not too many industries or in this, recession time period can say that they were up 38% over 2010. So I think that will...
I added the 5-year trends, but I'll ask you, Jim. So you're comfortable, with 11 months in, projecting what the year's going to look like?
Yes, sir. I wouldn't have done that in January or February, but I'll take a stab at it now.
So you're estimating around 13 million adjusted overall, down from 12% from the previous year, but still up 38%. What I thought was interesting, I started looking at the 5-year trends and noticed from 2006 to 2010, we've been up 35% in volume, and 2009 and 2014, just two different segments, still up, over 35%. As you look at it year over year, we've been growing significantly. Any comments on that from the panel? Anyone want to ask anything? And while I'm doing that, I didn't mention at the beginning, but the attendees listening here, in that window that should be open, usually on your right-hand side, in the lower corner, there should be a thing called questions. If you have some questions you'd like to ask the panel, type them in there, and I'll try to get to them as we go through the presentation, and if not, at the end. Anything the panelists want to add on, what we're looking at now? Because the next thing we're going to do is talk about the future. All right, so let's do this. So now, we're going to talk about the future. What's our estimates for the future? Now, before we do this, what I'm going to do is actually like to ask those listening in today, what do you think the demand's going to be for the future? And then we'll have a little discussion on it. So we'll take a quick poll. And what I'd like everyone to do is, what do you think demand's going to be in 2015? And this is going to be relative to 2014. Is it going to be significantly below, which is 5% under, or excuse me, 10% under, somewhat below 5%, about the same as the current year, 5% higher, or 5% lower? So why don't we take a minute here, everyone just kind of pick what you think it's going to be, and let's see what the audience thinks, and then we're going to have a little discussion on this. Everyone is actually doing a great job voting on this. So is it going to be below? Is it going to be high? There's a trend that it's going to be higher. Now the question is by how much? I'm going to take about 30 more seconds here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to share it. I'll get a little reaction, and then I'm going to start with Miles again. Miles, I'll start you after we get through this. On, again, from the closest person to the consumer, what do you think demand's going to look like? So let's, I'm going to close this now. We got a good percentage of people voting. So I'm going to close this and share it with everybody. And before we do that, 113. Okay. So everyone should be able to see the poll here, and what you'll see, I'll summarize it and then ask for some feedback. But over 50% think it's going to be over a 5% growth. Only 5% think it's going to be above 10. Majority, as you can see, is in between about the same as this year and a little higher. Some people think it's going to be a little lower. George, I'm going to ask you to comment on this because then we're going to have the panelists talk about it. So what's your reaction, George?
Yeah, I think everybody's pretty much right on the money. The growth is going to steadily increase. And I think one of the things that Miles alluded to earlier was the different groups that we're getting involved. And the earlier you can get them involved, the more they're going to grow. And you know, I think it's going to grow steady. Now, unless we have some kind of a political something or another, or some kind of national disaster, I think we'll see a good increase, but not at an astronomical rate like we did at the end of 2012 and beginning with 2013.
Well, let's see what our experts, panelists, have to say. Not jumping ahead there. Miles, the future, what's it look like for you? And you know, look at demand and maybe peel back a little about your comments about demographics that are changing.
It'll all be on how we communicate with that audience. They are a call to action group. They don't. There's a lot of demand on their times, and if they're talked to, they respond. But if they're not talked to, they move on to something else. So I'm, of course, being a retailer, you know, we are the eternal optimist about everything as a rule. But I got a lot of dealers around the country who are more than nervous about what they want to try and plan for the next year, because there's just so much unevenness that's going on. Handguns are going to do good all year long. Hunting is not going to really blow up until this group finds hunting. And when they do, it will be an explosion like none other, because they just haven't found it yet. So it's going to be, honestly, how we all communicate to that audience. And they're not people who read gun magazines. They do a lot on the internet, that's true, but they have call to action things like television and radio, or where are you on the country as to how you get a hold of them. But once you call them to action, they're ready to move.
So what about what's your answer to the poll?
If we have the advertising dollars, we think 15 is going to be good. If we don't get the ability to communicate with them, we're just going to hopefully hold our own for the next year.
Sound like a politician. What's the number? You getting 5%
sorry.
Below? Jeez.
We always try to build every year, but this has been tough. And, of course, with the dumping and all the new dealers, there's 917 new dealers and facilities that are being opened up around the country by some guy's estimate. That's a lot of new blood that's coming in, opening up stores, which, of course, just splits up market if they're not building market.
All right, I'm going to move on to Chris. This is like a news conference, not getting any answers sometimes. Chris, what's your prediction of the future? And again, give us a little more specifics in terms of the demand, the demographics.
Well, I don't want to be called a politician, so I'm going to say 7 right out of the gate.
7%?
Yeah. And,
okay, good.
I would concur with the poll. I think that is about my consensus on it as well. A stable selling, what I like to call a selling environment, steady, manageable growth is overall, I guess, how I would put it. Categories, yeah, handguns are going to stay really strong. In the AR segment, or the MSR, I guess I should call it now, it's really more subcategories, more specified, more unique or different firearms in that section that I think is going to continue to grow. And of course the price point ones as well. And shotguns, I think eventually, that's kind of a sore subject, I know, for many, but that's a category that I think is finally going to start coming back and growing.
Why do you say that?
Well, just opposed to I think that the technology is taken off enough now with the new products that are coming out. I think it's going to generate enough interest where we're going to see that category grow, and instead of being the lesser of the 3. Well, it'll still be the lesser of the 3 this year, but being compared to handguns and rifles. But
what about ammunition and accessories? You see all that. So what's your take there?
Yeah, that's I think I mentioned to you, Chris, when I was back in the warehouse. We're so busy, I was back there helping, and I'm amazed by when I do that how many neat accessories are back there. It's actually a little dangerous. There's a lot of stuff I want to buy, but I think that because there's such a market, just even in just the black guns, that all the market of all that new audience, as Miles was saying, that bought an AR and now they want to accessorize it. And even in just that market alone, there's a lot of demand.
Okay. Jeff, you've got obviously the firearms spectrum, but you also got into ammo recently. What's your take on the future?
Well, based on what Chris said, I'm hating life that I don't have a shotgun to talk about. Maybe someday. I think what last year, or the last 18 months anyway, taught us all is that manufacturers can't forecast worth a damn. And I guess trying to learn from past mistakes about what the influence is. I think the position that where we're looking at the market is really in line with what the poll was. Where I think calling it growth over 14 based on everything that we see is legitimate. I think saying it's going to be somewhere between 0 and 10% is legitimate. That's where we're sitting. And a couple things factor into that. And to George's point, you have to take the extraneous, non-controllable stuff out, like national disaster and political events. But our only caution, I think, is, or to ourselves, is just because the calendar flips from 12/31/14 to 1/1/15 doesn't mean we're in a whole new market. So I still think there's still some digging out to go here. I strongly agree with what Chris said about the evolving niche business in the MSR arena. And where I see the growth in that category coming from is the guys and gals who went out and maybe bought their first MSR during the height of the panic, got whatever they could, probably overpaid, and now realize that now that they've had some time with the gun, either really interested in accessorizing it to making it better suit them or interested in stepping up to what they found out they really want. So I think that's the bright spot on the MSR side for 15, and handguns continue to churn.
Okay. So I'm hearing from, you see the poll, but also the panelists that we're in this, at least 5 or as good as 14 to 10%. The poll shows only 5%, above that 10%, but probably above that 5 to 10, and that's probably a safe guessing. So Chris, we're gonna we'll hold you to the 7, and we'll come back next year and check with you on this. I'll ask Jim. NSSF has a great graphic on the demographics, and it's changing. Jim, you want to explain this?
Sure, Chris. Well, obviously 2014 was a big year. I think about third biggest on record. 15's got some promise for a lot of reasons, and this slide is one of them. NSSF conducted research in 14 on the women market as well as millennial market, and this research here done in conjunction with responsive management showed, an increase in participation in target shooting. But the cool thing about it was that increase in participation wasn't from the same old customer. It was a younger customer, more female, lived in an urban area more than suburban or rural, compared to existing target shooters versus the new target shooter. The new target shooter is someone that has been shooting for less than 5 years. They're not hunters yet, as Mile had mentioned. And one of the cool statistics there, that traditional way that a lot of us, listening and speaking here, that came into gun ownership was through, a father or a family member, uncle, something like that, at a very young age, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That last stat on the bottom right, that new target shooter picked up a gun 77% of the time older than 18. Coming, through non-traditional ways, which is a good sign. Whether it's being invited from a friend and really enjoying it. But one of the other things that we learned from the research is, they're not going to be coming in 1s or 2s. The women and the millennials are going to be coming in groups. So there's a huge promise and opportunity for 15.
I'm glad you talked about the hunting piece of that. As Miles brought up, I think Chris also brought up, that number's much lower. I know at our gun club we're getting a dozen or so members every month, and many of them fit this demographic, including the female side. Some of the action shooting that we're doing, we're actually getting a bunch of women in the action shooting, which I think is great. Let's talk now about if we're thinking the demand macro is going to be this 5 to 10%, let's now talk about building your plan. Okay, so in terms of building a sales plan with that big number now, how do we do that? So let's talk to each panelist. Where do you start? What time frames do you plan in? What influences the plan itself? And I'm going to actually go back and start with Jeff now on this side. Jeff?
Well, okay. In terms of looking at 15 in general, in terms of how we build a sales plan, we drive a number based on historical, and typically we'll use 3 years, and we go through the same hoops that everybody else does to figure out what part of 12 do you count and how much of 13 do you pay attention to and what of 14 is relevant. But if you take all that out, we look at broad stroke categories and then drill down really by the SKU level. And some of the factors that play in it for us revolve around things that a lot of what we can control, that we can plan for, because there is, on the manufacturing side, there is significant lead time relative to the supply chain for raw materials or sourced parts. And as a result of that, the work that we do now in the month of December is really geared around what we're going to be building and planning to sell in February, March. So, January is already done for us. It's in the books. And the things, the kind of factors that we're talking about that we can control and we can plan for are things like, hard and fast product launches and the amount of marketing spend that goes behind that. what we're doing with our distribution partners relative to promotions or stocking dealer programs, and how that affects the overall build and what we anticipate the buy-in to be on that. And furthermore, what our partners are doing that we know about from an advertising standpoint. So we know that if there's a push on a particular category or a particular product line from a third party, that we can anticipate some pull-through in those categories, and we try to time that out on a calendar basis. But we never, in terms of the actual sales forecast that drives a build plan, and I'm not talking about financial numbers, I'm talking about actual, products coming out the other end and going out the door. We're really working within a 90-day window, which makes it, if somebody gets the idea, hey, we should run a promotion tomorrow or next week or even next month, very difficult to execute unless you have the product sitting on the shelf already.
Interesting. I got a lot of questions on that, but with time I do want to move forward. Frank, are you there? I actually see that you've muted your, there you go. You there, Frank?
Yeah, yep, I checked in. Yes, sir, I'm here.
Why don't you tell us how, we can hear you well, thank you. Tell us how CAR goes through and does its planning, and you've obviously got a bunch of different brands, behind this. So do you do this at the corporate level? Do you do it by brand, by division, and then at what level of detail?
Yeah, we do it at the corporate level, and we have 3 unique brands. One is the Desert Eagle brand, which includes the Desert Eagle pistols, the big frame revolvers, and then we have the Auto Ordnance brand, which is a Thompson replicas of machine guns, and then we have the carbines and the World War II 1911s, and then in the CAR brand we have the concealed carry line. So when we look at since 2002, we've had growth every year, somewhere between 10 and 20%, and then we hit 2012, and the growth just absolutely goes through the roof. And we were not in a position to handle that growth, so we focused on making products that were basically our most profitable products. So I know during that time, some of our channel partners probably saw a lot of product not being available. And then once we hit 2013, at the end of 2012 and into 2013, it just went absolutely bonkers. And it stretched us, it stretched our vendors, and of course we tried to do what we could to meet the demand. And it was very challenging. And then we come into 2014 and we see that the first 6 months were very strong, and then the last 6 months we saw it become very soft. So then in that context, we think about planning for 2015, and it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough because we have a lot of vendors that, like Jeff was saying, need advance notice far, 3, 4, 5, 6 months in advance. We do almost all of our manufacturing here in the U.S., so we have to order materials 6 months in advance. My answer to 2015 is probably going to be similar to 2014, maybe a little less than 2014, but it depends on how much inventory we see cleared out of the system. For our industry, we see a lot of excess inventory, and for us, we're basically normally we plan pretty detailed month by month. But now we're even being, every 2 weeks, we're looking at it very closely to understand what is happening in the market and keeping our fingers crossed that some of the inventory dumps that we're seeing will be flushed out of the system as we come into the first quarter.
I think that's, you hit upon a couple things. That you talk about the supply chain, which we've talked about more. It's not like you can just turn on production or turn off production. You got the supply chain, the raw materials, the accessories, whatever, that all linked to this, which is important. And then I think the other thing you mentioned is we are in transition. Jim brought it up earlier as, even the first part of this year, was low. We've kind of normalized now. We're ahead of last year on the last 3 or 4 or 5 months. But we're in transition, and is the inventory in the pipeline, back to normal or not? I think is a big question. I'm sure people here are looking to that answer. But we're gonna move on, and I'm gonna ask Chris what your process is here on the distribution side. Then we're gonna move on. Chris?
Well, I think it all starts with listening very, very carefully to the needs of the customer, the consumer.
There's a new concept.
And so, but really what it boils down to is adapting. I mean, adapting to how quickly the market changes, and that's the critical part of this. Developing and then tactfully developing a new and unique sales tactic to combat that. The influencers, to me, the 3 things, as you mentioned there, is the historical results, but you do have to adapt them to what is the current status, what the season. Of course, there's seasonal products in our industry, but what is the state, and it fluctuates so quickly. And the other thing I would say too is in developing a sales plan is the performance of peers. If you've got a sales force, learn from certain individuals' performance, see what they're doing correctly, and listen to them, find out what's going on and what's creating their successes.
Very good. And I like the customer focus, a great place to start, which most of us don't do a great job at. Let me show what I'm going to do. I'm going to show the attendees here some of the things that we've done in the past in terms of helping organizations put this the sales forecast together. A lot of it does start with assumptions. What are the assumptions we're making? I listened to Jeff. You talked about some assumptions, but you also talked about what you can control. And it does come down a lot to what assumptions are we making, A, about macro demand, and then by the demographics, and then by the models and by the SKUs. And too often what we found when we work with organizations is they haven't defined those assumptions or challenged them well enough. Okay, we suggest that companies go through a fairly rigorous analysis and documentation of the assumptions, demand, inventory, politics, whatever, to get what numbers you're actually ending up with and why, so that when things are not necessarily as you planned, you can go back and figure that out. If Jeff's going, geez, we're going to do this promotion, and we expect this promotion is going to give us a 3, 4, 5% bump, did that really materialize? That's the assumption that's being made. But a lot of times they don't articulate that. The other thing that we didn't see a lot of is a lot of historical analysis. One thing that we found, we've been looking at this for years, been very happy to find this tool called Tableau, which you can basically link into your ERP system and extract data from a dashboard and analysis. It's phenomenal. It's actually very affordable. And so what we've done with clients is gone back and looked, here's a sales by category or subcategory. So that could be, types of handguns, types of shotguns, the accessories, the safes, whatever it might be. And you can see some trending, what's happening in certain times of the year. You can actually start slicing it by customer, by category, and seeing who's buying and who's not buying. This is actually a great way to find out, geez, customer 1's buying handguns and rifles, but nothing on the shotguns or otherwise. Here's customer 5 buying a lot on the shotgun side, but nothing on rifles. Again, this is representative of a different organization, but the concept's still the same. The tool allows you to look at year-over-year demand. You can see jumping out here, obviously, customer 3, it's decreased a lot in sales into 2014. So this is a tool that we found very helpful for organizations to start looking at historical demand, take that macro NICS data we looked at, bring it to yourself specifically and analyze that, and then talk about the customer. What's the customer looking for? So I'm going to jump into a poll number 2. We've actually got another poll here, because the question is, at what level of detail do people build their sales plan in? You know, in one case, it's so I'll ask you to go through and click the answers here. You're looking at annual sales dollars, which is basically saying we're going to sell $5, $10, $50 million. As you go lower in the list, you start getting more specific. So the category level, we just focus on the rifles or shotguns of the category. Subcategory says we do that plus by model, maybe not by customer. The second to last is the SKU. So that's kind of the detailed by SKU, by customer, maybe by geography, but getting very detailed. And the last piece is we just don't put a sales forecast together at all. So we're going to try to move this along because of the time constraints that we have, and
Chris,
get you this answer.
Chris, this is Miles. Who is the
Yes,
customer on this? Is the customer the dealers, or is the customer the end user?
It's your customer, you know. So I would
Okay.
think about it as your customer. You know, so if you're a manufacturer, you know, they might be forecasting at the distributor level, or if they go direct to dealer, you know, at the dealer level. Obviously not at the consumer level. You know, in your case, Miles, you
Ours
you
is
might
the
just
consumer level, yeah.
at the consumer level, right?
I guess my point, I'm getting at is that we need to know what the end consumer wants. All of us need to know that, because that's sort of how everything comes from. Back to his original point, it's really all about the end user. What are they wanting, and when do they want it, more importantly?
And it begs the question, Miles, and you and I have talked a lot about this, about the whole supply chain and the ability to connect, you know, the consumer to the raw material supplier and you know, dealer, distributor, manufacturer in between there, right? And we don't see it's done very well. Certain organizations do it better than others. So let's move this along, and I'll show you what people are thinking here, and then we'll move on. Most of them are at the subcategory level, not getting into the customer. 13% here actually do not put a sales forecast at all together. That could be because it's not relevant, and you got the other end at 10% doing an annual sales. So there's some interesting extremes here. I think the point I'd like to make is that it's not as much what you do out of the box, because you're probably making it now or, you know, a month or so before into next year. Jeff talks about the next 90 days. The question now is, once you have that plan or you have the forecast, what do you do with it? And what I'm going to do here is talk about the sample forecast that we have. You'll see these slides when we send it out. But what I'd like to ask is, when you now put this plan together, you know, how often do you review it? At what level of detail do you review it at? And, you know, when do you make changes? And I'll even start with Frank this time. And what do you do on the review side, Frank, in terms of reviewing the forecast? When do you adjust it, and how does that impact operations?
Yeah, we usually do by SKU. We go pretty detailed in our plan. We do it by SKU, and we have a high-level meeting every 2 weeks to review the plan, and we'll make adjustments every 2 weeks based on where we see suppliers shipping components, where we see orders coming in greater than we expected or less than we expected. So we keep ourselves pretty lean, and we run an ERP system that we get a lot of data out there to the sales level, and we're pretty focused on adjusting the plan on the fly almost. It sounds kind of crazy, but that's what we try to do. And a lot of it has to do just with the ERP system that we use in our company, which is we get so much data, sometimes it's information overload. Just one anecdote, one of my sales managers in another life worked at Beretta. He said he would ask headquarters, this was maybe 10 years ago, ask headquarters for a sales report. He'd get it a week later in the mail, and it was a printout. Now he gets it every morning in his inbox. in much greater detail. And that's just where we've invested as a company into all of this data, and the key is finding the right data points and using them to drive your business.
If you're not looking at data, I'm not sure what you're looking at. As an engineer, we try to drive data. Data's going to tell you something, then you add the, assumptions onto that. Jeff, what do you do? What does SIG do?
Very similar to what Frank said, and I just want to reiterate is that once you start the process, you never stop. It's not like you stop and then, okay, we'll get together and review it. Because of the things we've talked about and the difficulty in turning the ship on a dime, as it were, that review process is constant. There are constant changes made throughout the month. The full plan is reviewed at SKU level monthly for the next period out that we're talking about. So it's everything we can try to do to react as quickly as the organization can, based on ERP and to Frank's point as well, to try to be a little more nimble when you're talking about production on the scale that we're talking about.
Chris, you got a minute? You want to give us a quick insight on what Bill Hicks does?
Quick, I guess I would add to that it is definitely reactionary, and at the SKU level, you learn from. And one point I'd like to make too is the time. How fast does the product sell? Sometimes if you sell it too quickly, maybe question that.
If it's selling too quickly?
Yeah.
There you go.
We'd question why did it sell so quickly? Was it the price? Did we sell it too cheaply?
There you go. I remember a client that said their closure rate, he got his closure rate at 47%. He was pissed because he said, that's too high, where our prices are obviously too low, which is somewhat valid, right? We were running very tight on time. It went through very quickly. Didn't start well. I apologize for that. Let me summarize what I think we've gained so far. Got some of the points we started here, which is the need for, I'm using the word sophisticated planning process. I think Jeff actually emphasized the process and being able to stay on top of it. Frank talked about every 2 weeks, all right, and staying on top of it. But having a process, we found, is very, very important, because the assumptions you're making now about the next 30, 60, 90 days are definitely more valid than 4, 5, 6 months from now. And so the process you put in place is what's really going to be critical. That's going to link into the supply chain, okay? And if you manage this demand process and the supply chain process, you're going to run into a greater profitability. I know, many organizations in the industry, got caught with too much inventory. They over-planned, over-forecasted, however you want to call it. I think overall we are looking at long-term growth. I think we're definitely in that 5 to 10% growth rate. But it does come down to execution. We can talk all day, we can plan all day in the process, but it comes down to execution. He who executes the best really is who wins. So let me ask one last question to the audience, and the question is, what are your challenges? What's the number one challenge you're going to have with building a reliable sales plan, sales forecast into the future? One last vote here with 2 minutes to go. Is it that you don't have the tools or the information to do any analysis? Is that you just can't forecast the demand, just don't know? You can do it, but I can't get buy-in. What I call about it's not needed. Oftentimes we've got owners that just go, I know what it is. We don't need any tools. Sometimes I've heard sales guys don't want to commit to a number. That's why that's in there, or there's some other reason. So let's do that. And I'm looking at 1 minute left to go here. We've got almost 3/4 here voted. So I'm going to close this up and then wrap this up so we try to keep on time.
Chris, if I may, this is Miles. I will tell this to all of you who are out there. Try very hard to listen to the dealers. They will tell you what's selling and when it's selling, and maybe that'll help in 16 and 17 down the road, because you need to know that. There's performance-oriented dealers who are very number-oriented who can help. All you got to do is ask. So.
Thanks, Miles.
Yeah.
So we've got mostly just putting the forecasting demand, what could it be, followed by the tools and information. Real short on this, anyone that's ever tried something the first time, it probably wasn't very easy, but after you do it a few years or repetitions, it becomes much easier. Our first time out of the gate when we did it one of our clients, we were about 11-12% off overall. We got down to 6% accuracy the year after that. But it takes time and reviewing some of the assumptions that we've made and why we made them. So let me do this. I'd first like to thank our panelists, Frank, Jeff, Chris, Jim, Miles, and George. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights. We got great demand on this, so I think we'll try to do something maybe again early next year or after SHOT. To those listening, the key here is commit to doing something. You've spent an hour listening to some experts talk about how they decide what the demand is, how to forecast it, some of the tools they use. Now you got to commit to making your process better. 68% of you said forecasting demand's tough. Look at your process. Look at your sales process, your supply chain process. Where is it that you have short and long-term opportunities for improvement as OFIs? RSC Growth Strategy Partners can help you do some assessments on that and bring you some tools that would make it easier for you. But bottom line is you got to implement. So, the worst thing you can do is not make any changes to what you've been doing in the past. Start working on something, make it more successful, and it will be more successful. So I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to thank our panelists. I'll thank George. Mo, again, thank you very much, NASGW, and congratulations on your retirement. We're running out of time here, so I'm going to wrap this up and thank all the panelists. I will send out the presentation later on today or maybe tomorrow, so you have a copy of that. If you have other questions, there were a bunch of questions that we didn't get to today. We'll try to answer those, and everyone have a good week. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.